So to give some context, this story takes place at a campground where myself and others have had strange experiences, but those stories are for another time. When I was around 12 years old, I accompanied my father to our family's longtime campground where he was going to perform some lawn care work before the camping season began later that month. We were probably going to be there for a while, so I asked my dad if I could invite my friend to come with us, to keep me entertained while he finished up some mowing. To my delight, my dad agreed and said that he could come. For privacy purposes, I'll be referring to my friend as D. D and I had been friends for years and had many of the same interests. Among those common interests was our curiosity for the unknown and paranormal. So while my dad was busy mowing, I suggested to D that we should try to do some EVP recordings in the cafeteria just to see if we could capture anything, to which he happily agreed. The cafeteria was a two-story cement and brick building, with the upstairs being where the kitchen and dining hall were, and the basement, otherwise known as the dungeon, was an old dorm that was being mostly used for storage, with a very big and dimly lit storage room, a long hall, a smaller storage room, and a rather large bathroom. The whole atmosphere down there always gave me the creeps. Myself and Dee made our way into the dining hall and sat down at one of the tables. We got out my old flip phone and started using the voice recording app to see if we could catch any voices or other unexplained sounds. We took turns asking questions and waiting for responses for about 5 minutes, but to no avail, until we heard some noises coming from the dungeon. We discussed going down there to see what the noise was, but chalked it up to be an animal, since it wasn't very uncommon for animals to get into buildings at this campground, so for the most part we just brushed it off. We continued with our makeshift EVP session for about another 5 minutes, until we heard another noise coming from the dungeon. But this time we both froze in place. We looked at each other in shock and what we were hearing. My friend looks at me and says, "Is that chanting?" At this point we are both very freaked out and decide to exit the cafeteria and just go on a walk. As we are walking, we are speculating what the sounds we heard could have been. I did my best to come to some logical explanation to what we were hearing. I mean, there was no way that there were people down there. We would have seen or heard them beforehand. Right? As we continued our walk, we ended up about 60 yards from the backside of the cafeteria, where we could see a door with a window that lead into the dungeon. We both looked at the door and didn't see anything weird, so we kept walking. I made the mistake of saying to Dee, how scary would it be if we looked at the door and saw someone looking back? As a joke. Immediately after saying this, we both looked back at the door, fully expecting nothing to be there. But to our horror, something was there. Not just something though, there were multiple people. I froze in place, terrified of what I was seeing. There were 3 people that we could see, and they appeared to be in cloaks. 1 in a red cloak and 2 in black on either side, staring directly back at us. One of the scarier parts was that I never even saw their faces, just the hoods that they were wearing. Before I could even ask D if he was seeing what I was seeing, I looked to see him in full sprint down the road about 50 yards in front of me. So instinctively I started running too. We ran to tell my dad what we had heard and seen, to which he pretty much brushed off but said that he would go and check just to ease our minds. Now my dad is not a man to be messed with. He was a 6'5" cop and almost 300 pounds, so just his sheer size would be enough to intimidate or scare someone off if they were trespassing. My dad went and checked the dungeon as we watched from a distance. He came back out saying that everything was fine and he didn't see or hear anyone in there. We were still a little freaked out, but glad that he said there was nothing to worry about and nobody was there. So we continued with our day until it was time to leave, but we still steered clear of the cafeteria. Flash forward about 8 years and I had mostly forgotten about the whole thing. One night my older brother, who is older than me by about 7 years, and I were up late one night sitting on our parents' back deck just reminiscing about the times we had growing up. We eventually got to talking about spooky stuff that had happened to us, and that brought us to talking about our experiences at the campgrounds. I proceeded to tell my brother the story about D and I seeing and hurting the people in cloaks in the dungeon. My brother then gets a very perplexed and somewhat scared look on his face and says to me, "You're joking," to which I said, "I'm not. You can ask D and he will tell you the same thing." My brother, getting more and more freaked out by the story I'm telling him, proceeds to tell me something that has haunted me to this day. He tells me that when I was about 2 years old, a satanic cult had broken into the campground. The cultists had gone through every dorm and the church, gathered all of the Bibles, and taken them to the field, which was directly on the other side of the road from where myself and D had seen the people in the window. He tells me that they had burned a massive pentagram into the field, piled all the Bibles in the middle, and set them on fire. The next day a couple workers had gone out to the campgrounds to do some regular maintenance and found what had been done. They called the police, and according to my brother, they not only found the pile of burned Bibles inside of this massive pentagram, but they also found the remains of dead animals all around it in a ritualistic pattern. Nobody had heard or seen anything more about the cult since then, until I told my dad and brother what D and I had experienced. Flash forward to today, so 11 years since what we experienced, and nobody has heard or seen anything else that we know of. So did D and I just imagine what we experienced, or did we happen to interrupt another cult gathering? After hearing what my brother told me and comparing it to what we saw, I find it hard to believe anything other than the latter.